Our top story, Rishi Sunak is finally at 10 Downing Street. He is the new Prime Minister of Britain. But the former Chancellor of the Exchequer is bracing for a rocky road ahead as he inherits an economy which is possibly headed for a recession. The outgoing Prime Minister, Liz Truss, resigned after her budget of tax cuts funded by debt sent shockwaves through the markets, bringing the pound to a record low and triggered yields on government bonds to soar. The UK government had to make a U-turn on most of its budget provisions, including scaling back a cap on soaring energy bills that have contributed heavily to the cost of living crisis for tens of millions of Britons. Sunak had warned against Liz Truss's tax cuts in the previous battle for the Premier's seat. He was proven right as the budget sent the pound crashing close to parity with the dollar. The former finance minister had also promised to scrap VAT on household fuel bills for a year to tackle the rising cost of living. The Tory leader, who prioritised controlling inflation in his economic policies, is now getting a mixed response from the British citizens.
Someone who's been educated in Harvard knows exactly what he's doing. You know, it's the absolutely only choice. Instead of just going for, like a lot of the politicians in their own, just want to be a politician in their own interest. I think he has a genuine interest in the welfare of this country.
He's a low-tax, trickle-down economist. Won't work. He's got to go. Got to move aside.
For more on this big story, our correspondent Alex Isaac now joins us live from London. Alex, what a day it has been. History, really, that we've witnessed today, not just for Rishi Sunak and for the United Kingdom, but in some ways for India as well. But fact of the matter is that Rishi Sunak knows all too well that even as he's made history by becoming the first British Prime Minister of colour, he is wearing a crown of thorns, and there is unlikely to be a honeymoon period for this Prime Minister. Therefore, it's little surprise really that he repeatedly focused on the need to earn the trust of the British people in his first address to the nation.
Absolutely, yeah. There's definitely no honeymoon period here. You know, from what I've also heard, that he's currently asking former cabinet members into his office to let them go in preparation for his new cabinet coming in. Who he will choose? Well, we're probably going to see Jeremy Hunt remain as Chancellor, maybe Kemi Badenoch, maybe Ben Wallace. But ultimately, what Rishi Sunak has to do in this historical moment of being Prime Minister is to make sure that the UK public are also backing him, because they have lost real faith in the government. Many people don't believe that we can get through these tough economic times no matter what happens. We've seen such a dip in economic stability, but also we're facing the crisis of food going up, inflation rates going higher, our borrowing costs, which are in their 40 billions from what I understand, and that's due to problems such as COVID. And then obviously we have the energy bills continuing to rise due to issues and the war in Ukraine as well. So there are so many different challenges that Rishi Sunak has to face externally, and then of course dealing with his own party members as well. They haven't really been that forthcoming over the past few weeks after Boris Johnson was ousted in the position of Prime Minister, although back then 60-odd still resigned because they said that they didn't want Boris Johnson to go forward. Already now we do know that a couple of ministers have resigned themselves. Brandon Lewis posted on Twitter, and we do understand that Jacob Rees-Mogg as well. It's likely that they have put their resignation in for the cabinet so that they don't get pushed, because it's unlikely that they were going to be taking on roles within the cabinet. Jacob Rees-Mogg himself said that he believed Rishi Sunak was a socialist and therefore he didn't want to work under him. But both men will be going to the backbench, and hopefully they will still say that they're going to unite back behind Rishi Sunak. So hopefully once they're in that backbench position, they're actually going to work with the backbenchers and make sure that there is complete unity within this government, because that is what it needs. We heard in Rishi Sunak's statement there when he spoke to the British public, it's all about trust, it's about
right, Alex, we leave it at that. Thank you so much for getting us all those details. Clearly, a rocky road lies ahead for Rishi Sunak. All right, at this point, we're also now joined by British Indian writer and columnist Farrukh Dhondy. Mr. Dhondy, thanks so much for speaking to WION. We will get to the challenges that Rishi Sunak faces in just a moment, but let's first focus for a bit on how history has been made today. Now, for the benefit of our viewers, let's just recap some important facts about Rishi Sunak. He is the first British Prime Minister of Indian descent, first British Prime Minister of colour, first Hindu British Prime Minister, the youngest British Prime Minister in 200 years, richer than the King of England, the fifth British Prime Minister in 6 years, and the third in just the year 2022. Now, the naysayers are saying what's Indian about him? But as you know, there's a lot of excitement here in India, given that he is the first British Prime Minister of Indian descent. As a British Indian, how do you view this development? Is it historic?
No, everything you said is true. He is the first of all those things, and he certainly is Indian in several ways. If you see pictures of him, he's wearing a rakhi on his wrist. There was a video of him lighting Diwali lights, diyas outside 10 Downing or 11 Downing Street or whatever it was. And he certainly has an Indian family and Indian family connections. And one understands completely the jubilation that the subcontinent or India especially feels that we've got now a person of color. But as Prime Minister, but it's not an Obama moment, because Rishi hasn't got the mandate of the people. He was elected through machinations within the Tory party, and even without a vote of the Tory party members, who are now, even today, resigning in droves from the membership of the Tory party, saying, we weren't given a say, we don't want a Prime Minister who we didn't elect. So he wasn't elected by anybody except a majority of, or 100, of 102, or 150, or whatever it was, of the members of the Tory party within Parliament. The other competitors, Penny Mordaunt and Boris Johnson, pulled out of the race because they couldn't make probably the 100 number that was required by the new rules. So it's all manipulation, and he doesn't really have a mandate, and the country knows that. That's why the opposition leaders are calling for a general election now, saying we can't have a Prime Minister and a cabinet who have not been elected by the people at all. It remains to be seen whether Rishi Sunak will follow the election manifesto on which the Tories were elected in 2019. It was somebody else's manifesto. It was Boris Johnson's manifesto. Of course, Rishi was Chancellor at the time and must have had a say in at least the economic outline of that manifesto. Let's see if he sticks to that, because the situation has changed. It's like jumping, helicoptering onto the Titanic to become its captain before it strikes the iceberg. The icebergs are all around him. The National Health Service is in a complete mess. The economy is in a complete mess, left by Liz Truss, but initiated, I suppose, by Rishi Sunak as Chancellor himself. And of course, another factor is that the public feel that he's the person who got rid of Boris Johnson, who it is seen was the politician who could gain an 80-seat majority against Labour. Maybe Boris didn't gain it. Maybe Jeremy Corbyn, who was the opposition leader, lost it through his radicalism.
Okay,
Yeah.
Mr. Dhondy, I take your point about Boris Johnson, but let's not forget that many blame him for the path that the UK is in today. The fact that in the year 2022 alone, Britain has had 3 prime ministers and so much political instability. But I understand the reality checks that you're offering. These are important points that you're making. And you've used some very strong terms. You're saying this is like helicoptering on to the Titanic to become its captain. You are right in pointing out that most of Rishi Sunak's critics have pointed out that he does not have the mandate to be the Prime Minister. Nobody has voted for him. Let's, for a moment, focus on some of the salient points he made in that address to the nation soon after being officially anointed as Prime Minister. He repeatedly talked about unity and stability. He knows he needs to unite a deeply divided country and a deeply divided Conservative Party. He talked about integrity, professionalism, accountability. He said, trust is earned and I will earn yours. He does realize the Conservative Party is suffering from its biggest credibility crisis yet. And to address the criticism about the mandate, he said the mandate belongs to us. That is what unites us. Now, we all agree that he's wearing a crown of thorns. But officially, the next general election in the UK isn't scheduled until January of 2025. What do you think is likely to happen over the next 12 months? Do you think this government is unlikely to last?
I have absolutely no idea what I don't have a crystal ball, but I absolutely do know that the Tory, from all indications, that the Tory party, despite all this talk of unity and let's get together, and, I support Rishi, even Liz Truss says I support Rishi, there are deep divisions of ideology, of the way forward, on the economy, on welfare, even on spending on weaponry for Ukraine. There are dissensions within the Tory party itself. And there are people within the Tory party who are calling for a general election. In other words, they don't want to stay in power because the Labour Party is 30% ahead of the Tories. And if you call a general election today, the Tories will be wiped out. And I don't mean wiped out and in becoming an opposition. They'll be wiped out with very few seats in the parliament. They won't be a running party at all. And what's happened is that despite the talk of unity, the Tories might split within this parliament, within Rishi Sunak's reign, almost immediately. It depends on who he appoints now as in his cabinet. It depends on what he does about welfare cuts. It depends what he does about tax rises or not tax rises. It depends on how the markets take. So far, they've been okay. And then it also depends on the Boris Johnson loyalists. Because yes, Brutus has become Caesar, but there are several Mark Antonys waiting with daggers drawn, or at least with speeches which could win support anti.
Okay, the daggers are clearly drawn. There is no doubt about that. And Rishi Sunak has already issued a dire warning. Either we unite or we die. Now, if the Conservative Party is not ready for a fresh election, can they really unite behind Rishi Sunak? Or is that too much to ask for? We will find out in the weeks and months ahead. Thanks very much, Farooq Dondi, for speaking to WION.